Your government despises you in a way that you could not even begin to imagine. And it's particularly insidious here in Ireland, because people are encouraged to call politicians by their first names, and still do. That spell, that black magic weapon, has worked so well in this country that even people, when they hate a politician or being insulted by them, will still call them by their first name. They're not our mates, they're not our friends, they're here to destroy us on behalf of the globalists. You have to get that into your head. These are vassal enforcement agencies. It's not just Ireland, it's everywhere, running your country on behalf of unelected globalist transnational bodies. People say to themselves, I get up every morning and it seems like the government only exists to make my life harder. Correct. When was the last time you switched on the evening news and you heard a politician talk about we're going to improve the quality of life for ordinary people? Mediocrity is the fertilizer of tyranny. You could not have political parties or political people involved in politics who were any way dynamic or free thinking because they would not enforce these punitive measures upon us, such as vaccine passes. Don't think that they're idiots. Don't think, oh, we'll vote these gobshites out and get the... No. The next crowd have the same detestable, psychopathic, visceral hatred of you. And that's why they're in the jobs they were in. If they liked you and cared about you, they wouldn't be selected for government. This is why governments all over the West are filled with mediocre, elitist caste. This quasi-sentient caste, I call them, of people from politically connected families with money interests. And they're probably not bright enough to actually run the family business, but they're smart enough to carry out the orders given to them in a press release from the Clinton Foundation. You cannot have a conversation with them. They're not capable of internal thought. A lot of them came from families who were given free land by De Valera in the 1930s, and they became suddenly a replacement for the Protestant ascendancy. And they became the bedrock of all the institutions in this country, from the GIA to the political parties and so on, and especially things like the civil service. And to this day, have always served in their family the state, regardless of what punitive measures they impose upon the citizens. It's all about this control method that goes on. And this goes across the entire establishment, not just in the politicals, the civil service, the bureaucrats, the health service, especially the mainstream media. When the Irish arrived during the famine times in New York and Boston and Baltimore and Philadelphia, after the mobs had thrown rocks at them and saying, go back home, Paddy, the next person they met was the Democratic representative who said, welcome to America. There's a soup and a sandwich over there for you. Here's your US citizen form and here's your Democratic voter card. If you want to know what's happening, all the political parties here want a blank slate. They want a new constituency that doesn't have the baggage, that won't remember how the politicians basically threw us to the IMF in 2008 and suddenly resigned for family reasons. They want new people who don't remember when RTE, during the height of their psychological warfare against the Irish state, during the COVID lockdown, had parties where there was no mask and no social distances. And when they should have went to prison for that, and all they did was lessons were learned. There's a lot of people out there who now see, and it's rapidly increasing, and it's going on in all the countries. In England, the days of Tory and Labour is over. In Ireland, the days of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael is rapidly coming. Everyone's going, these are all working for the same side. Now, what's the best way to deal with that? Bring in new ones, have no baggage and have no skin in the game, as they say. Wait for the natives to die, and then you have your new population. So what's being done to the Irish right now with this globalist human trafficking and the flooding of our country with people who don't come from here? And remember, it's always the politicians, not the people. Never blame the people. If I was in a crappy country and I was offered to live in a nice, rich country like this, I'd take it too. What's being done to us is being exactly what was done to the Native Americans and exactly what was done to the Aborigines in Australia. We are being disenfranchised by our so-called government. The present Irish government want to exterminate the Irish. There's no difference between Manifest Destiny and what they call the New Ireland. We are an indigenous people, and our kin is not the colonial British, the colonial Belgians, the colonial Germans, the colonial French. Our kin are the Native American First Nations peoples, the Aborigines of Australia, and any other indigenous people that has been wiped out or marginalised, basically discarded from society. We're hearing language like this already. White Irish men have all this privilege. Sorry, that's racist. You're the white Irish man that has the privilege, not the average guy who's trying to make a living and look after his family and has to live and die by the rules that you impose upon him. We were victims of colonialism. We were the first ones transported to the Americas as indentured servants, which is a nice way of saying slaves. You're the one that has the privilege. They're now changing neighbourhoods deliberately, and they're using immigrants as pawns, and they don't care what happens because A, they're following the orders given to them by their leaders, and B, they're not sentient enough. They don't have the internal monologue to actually say, am I actually damaging this country here? Am I damaging my nation? Am I damaging these people in this neighbourhood? No, the first thing they'll do is they'll be told to call someone a name, to throw a slur at someone that's been thrown in other countries and other situations like that. The working class always pays the initial brunt of the attack, whether it's steel mills or coal mines shut down, whether it's their neighbourhoods being flooded with refugee centres. Whatever is done to the working class, you can be sure that's the agenda, because they hit them first. You know, and you see how the NGO thing was so central to the issues concerning immigration. They instantaneously flooded the place with NGOs. Pop-up NGOs overnight. All the old cliches, bringing the community together. People saw right through it. They knew, right, who are these people coming in and telling us that we're suddenly all wonderful and we all have to be friends? The media will interview them. They won't interview the locals. And so you'll have some local guy claiming to be a community representative. He's on a paycheck for being in an NGO, and he's saying, well, what we need really in Ballymun is to fight these far-right fascists is new bus services. No, that's not addressing the problem. There's almost no one in the mainstream media in any of the West that you could actually even refer to as a sentient human being at this point. They're purely transnational press releases from organisations, the Clinton Foundation or the World Economic Forum. Those press releases are encapsulated in skin and a bad haircut. And that's what journalists are today, and that's what newsreaders are today. And they're only there to punish you, to make you feel everything is hopeless when they feel like it. There's some really wicked stuff going on in Ireland at the moment. The Irish Times seems to have endless stories lately of native Irish people who's saying, oh, we're glad we moved to Canada, we're glad we moved to Australia, we're glad we got out of Ireland, we had to get out. You could actually see the Irish Times is literally encouraging Irish people to leave. They're creating a real brain drain like they had in the 60s in England. They want to get the people that should be rebuilding the society out and replacing them with ones who will have no heritage in this land or this country. Now, I'm not putting those people down, but they just don't have it. Irish people are not allowed to enjoy our own country. That's one maxim you can take forever. And as soon as things are good, they say, I should be better off somewhere else. And that's been going on forever. In the past, they did it with indentured servants to the Caribbean, to Barbados. Then it was the famine. They built Catholic parish churches all over America and Australia and everywhere else. Well, now it's this new thing. It's like, well, you know, Ireland is great, but, you know, I'm doing better in Canada. I'm doing better here. I'm doing better there. The weather's nicer where I am now. Absolutely, 9/11 was the opening salvo. Even if the official story was true on that, right? The way that was presented to the public was to do as much psychological damage as possible. En masse. There was a reality in this world before 9/11, right? You know, that hadn't really changed much since the 1960s. There had been a sort of a cultural growth, a change, a flux, a very positive time in the West in general, I think. I think there was tremendous growths in things like music and art and filmmaking, and the arts flourished, and it became a time where the average person was able to avail of technology to move themselves up the fields that they probably wouldn't have been able to previously. It was a kind of a mini renaissance, the period of the 60s to the 80s. And that kind of continued, but it wasn't as intense until 2001. If you watch news broadcast reports from New York City on the night before 9/11, it's like looking at a different planet compared to what was the next day. What happened there was a psychic shock, right? You had the first time in history, you had billions of people all over the world observing these horrific events in Lower Manhattan at the same time, right? This creates a tremendous amount of psychic energy, okay? And then you're entering into the world of theoretical physics, quantum physics, where we know that reality is both a particle and a wave function at the same time, depending on the observer effect. So that was the observer effect on steroids globally. So what happened then was the wave shot up, it jumped up, and we were put into a psychic state, and reality changed. And to sustain this wave, they had the invasion of Iraq. You had a country that had absolutely nothing to do with it. It even said they would cooperate with finding the terrorists who did it. Attacked, and you had people in America wanting the Iraqi government overthrown for 9/11, even though they were no more responsible for 9/11 than Iceland or, Macau. The wave function had to be sustained, this certain state of terror. And then this had all kinds of other spin-offs, such as Islamic terrorism, that really began to take off, and so on. And they had to keep this thing going. And the ultimate transformation or transformative moment was going to be the war on us. Your politicians and your government are actually at war with you. They're in office to destroy you on behalf of these globalist powers. And they're doing it through psychic weapons. It then went into biological warfare. That what happened with the release of that COVID vaccine was no different than the SS Gruppenführer pouring the Zyklon B into the showers at Auschwitz. It was the same thing. And they didn't lie to us. They're on video saying the next pandemic will kill so, and they're smiling and smirking.
So we, we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is, will get attention this time. Mm-hmm.
The techniques that were being used in terms of how the media was actually using black magic in a very literal sense. When I say black magic, I mean like imposing a false paradigm upon the populace. There was ridiculous ones here in Ireland where they set up an army tent down by the docks in Dublin and they parked a naval ship behind it. What has a naval gunship got to do with fighting a viral infection? But the whole thing was designed to invoke a state of terror, a state of emergency that began with Chinese people going down on the ground. And it took on a very sinister aspect when they showed the footage of the trucks lined on a street in Milan in Italy, deliberately done at night time, nothing being loaded on, nothing being taken off, and not even telling you what they were there for. They purely existed as a symbol for people to fill in the blanks that these are the trucks that are being brought in to carry out the tens of thousands of bodies of people. Without anyone actually even saying it, you finish the conclusion in your own head. Oh dear, we're really in trouble now. Now we all know how much confusion and gaslighting and paradoxical information was central to this at the beginning, and all the way through it, you don't need a mask, need 2 masks, this kind of thing. They were basically declaring psychological warfare upon the human race. Now you can say, oh, it's all conspiracy theory, but there was a time in Germany when Germans would hear about what was going on in the East, the mass killings of Russian soldiers and everything. They said, that's not true, that's all lefty lies. They didn't use the word conspiracy theory, but the same effect. DNA seems to have certain functionality in it that uses our nervous system to lock us into this reality. Affecting the DNA affects our version of reality. That's how our nervous system regulates through this quantum theory, this collective miasmic dream we have. It affects everything. And the fertility rates have collapsed all over the world. Standard mortality rates are running at 30% in many Western countries right now, directly because of the COVID vaccine. And we're just being wiped out. And it's not just us, it's also the immigrants, the refugees. They're being targeted as well too. They might be used initially as kind of foot soldiers of the regime, as a kind of a super NGO. But that's the stage before. They'll also be subject to this chemical alteration. You want to talk about natural law, right? This is natural law. The COVID vax was to be sold as the genesis moment for the rest of humanity's history to be vaccinated regularly and upgraded with software, right? That was their magic bullet. Well, as a result of that, I believe that maybe all vaccines are now dead. Because people are not only skeptical because of that vaccine, but the people like me who are not anti-vaxxers, I've decided now, I'm pretty skeptical now about all vaccines. So the exact opposite of what they wanted is now the norm. There are now billions of people in this world are going, I'm never letting any kind of vaccine in me ever again. That's natural law. I felt that there was a sort of a divine war being declared upon us. And I'm not given to that kind of language normally. As soon as I said that to myself, it was that sensation you instantly get inside of you, that good feeling. It gave me relief. When you know what kind of warfare is being declared upon you, and then you know how to defend yourself from it. Before that, it's just anxiety and hypertension. And incompetence plays a huge part in this as well. It's almost like the dark forces behind it are using the most incompetent politicians and bureaucrats to make this happen. I was getting 2,000-3,000 people listening to my vlogs. Before that, as soon as I mentioned it's a spiritual warfare, overnight the vlogs went to 10 to 15,000. So it definitely hit people. They heard something that they had been thinking themselves too, quietly. These people are extremely sinister. I mean, this is why we have Russell Brand on Newsnight about 8 or 9 years ago saying we want spiritual socialism and distribution of wealth. Overnight he goes from being this ridiculous character to a guru for idiots, and they all fall for it. We have to watch every move they make, and they have all kinds of traps set up for us in everything. They themselves don't experience life the way we do. They don't have this inner richness. You can see that even in the local politicians in Ireland. You couldn't have a conversation with him or her. There's an absence of personality. They're not fully integrated in the personality level. You know, you have in Jungian psychology the concept of individuation, where you go through your life, you make all the mistakes, and by the time you reach your crone or senex at the end of your life, you're individuated. You've put all that behind you and find that it has a meaning. Well, they're never individuated because they never go through life and have that one reflective moment. This is why media is full of these people, where they say, has this all happened for a reason? No, because everything follows a protocol, everything follows a plan. So because they don't individuate, they've decided that the human condition and species as a whole shouldn't be allowed to individuate. Most of them have been born into affluence and money. They've never had to struggle for anything. And if they did come from a middle-class background or whatever, you would find that they were picked because they were not intelligent enough to think. This has always been noticed. Right back to the time of Plato's The Republic, there was a belief that, you know, an educated poor person is a dangerous person. You know, that was somebody you had to watch, you know, big time. I have a friend who said to me, they've been teaching Irish for a century in Irish schools, and it's failed, and that could only have happened because it was planned that way. We have to start using Irish language, not in complete sentences, but bringing in words here and there. And that includes people naming their kids, you know, giving them traditional Irish names and that kind of thing. Or even just using Irish language in daily speech, like instead of saying good morning, good day, or slán, sha, you know, I talk, so start bringing in the Irish language, you know, even if you're not, I'm not adept at it, but I can get by on it. If you're not fluent in Irish, don't think, well, I'm not going to make an idiot of myself by speaking Irish. No. Whatever words you do know, bring them into your daily language. And you will find very quickly that you'll improve your vocabulary greatly overnight. On top of that, you'll shift your consciousness. Language is the maker of reality. You know, it's so important. Don't call it spelling and grimoires for nothing, you know. Just little things like that stop them from programming, because you program yourself, they can't program you. Christianity was the first attack upon Irish culture, especially the concept of kingship. Tara was the kind of central touch point. And you had like the Ard Rí, the High King, and he would be elected by the kings of the province. The rights of kingship in Ireland, the first thing that the king did in pagan times was to marry the goddess Eru, actually marry the land. So that was his wife. And that created a symbolic link. This is the land, this is yours. Well, the Christians didn't want that. They wanted them to worship a rabbi nailed to a plank in the Middle East. So they changed all that. And that was the beginning of it. People forget that by the late 1880s, Irish culture was essentially dead. And it wasn't for certain groups like the Gaelic League who revived Irish culture and gave us this wonderful legacy. My God, when I was growing up in school, you got your Folan's copybook. There was a picture of a round tower. It would be embroidered with Celtic design, you know. Yeah, that's me. That's my land. You look at your Irish money, the interlaced artwork. You could say to the world, this is our art. Visitors would come overseas and they look at the Irish currency. They wouldn't want to spend it. They want to frame it because all the beautiful artwork on it with medieval texts reproduced on the back or quotes by like Dean Swift or people like that, William Butler Yeats. We were saturated. This is our country. This is what we're like. This is why we have these designs. It was the new state wanted to make it smart. We're not British. We're not Europeans. We're Gaels. We're different. That's why when rock and roll came to Ireland, bands like Horslips and Thin Lizzy, they continued the thing. Songs like Black Rose by Thin Lizzy and Derek Doom by Horslips and King of the Fairies, they were part of the continuum. We had it all. We knew who we were. Even if we didn't have nothing, we had an identity. But when we started to have stuff, they started to take the identity away big time. My God, we really miss that badly now. You even look at the old Irish post offices when it said Offic on fish in Irish and it had the old Irish lettering and stuff like that. Every government document had that. Gone. And I want to see that really come back big time. Instead of all roads leading to Brussels or Davos or Washington, D.C., we have to create a situation in this country where all roads lead to Tara, where we came from. It's a powerful thing we have in us. All the centuries of crap this country dealt with, they never took that from us, ever. Those hate speech laws have nothing to do with protecting minorities. They have everything to do with protecting this quasi-sentient political class we have here in Ireland. You have like a situation where you have a minister in Ireland in charge of human trafficking. And someone says, I don't like this guy, what he's doing. He's causing turmoil in a certain neighborhood. So he's protected from criticism by you'll be arrested for hate. Extremely devious. The hate speech law in Ireland is probably the most punitive and sinister legislation placed in this country since the original penal laws, in that it specifically targets a specific group, working class and middle class white Indigenous Irish people. And it also doesn't punish other groups. So basically, other groups can say what they want about, a white Irish males and get away with it. The purpose of the penal laws was to destroy the Irish culture, to make them British. The same thing with this, to destroy what's left of the Irish culture and make them globalists by compliance. Well, academia is very well paid in Ireland. The salaries of academics in Ireland is off the scale. And yet Irish universities have performed very poorly on the internationals. It's only, I think, this year, the first Irish university, Trinity, made the top 100. And that's for the first time in like that decade. So you have academics, they're basically tenured professors, basically all hippies at this point, are trained by 60s hippies. And they have a Marxist philosophy, they're sheltered from reality. They just train the next generation of students in this woke culture, which they themselves actually believe. They're fanatics as well. They're almost like the Orwellian, outer party. They really believe all this stuff, this nonsense. And they are a pampered caste in this many-layered caste system. And they know best for everyone because they have degrees, but many of them don't have any street smarts or anything like that. The system requires people, and whether they're in NGOs, whether they're in the mass media, whether in academia, that can't put the full picture together. Why? Because they're trapped in specific dogmas. What are these specific dogmas? The need to express their own virtue. I'm a wonderful person because I want to reduce my carbon footprint. I'm a wonderful person because I call working class people in Ballymun and Eastwall far right thugs. I'm a wonderful person because I've Greta Thunberg's book. It's all about vanity at the end of the day. So if I say climate change is a serious problem, I will be rewarded with this kind of like virtuous salivating. You know, I'm a better person than other people. You know, it's very, very Pavlovian, very much so. They often say PhD is piled higher and deeper. By the PhD level, you're supposed to be doing your own research at that point, but it's still all in the confines of the parameters that are set. If you can't express yourself outside the parameters and you're rewarded for the system for remaining inside the parameters, you're not going to know anything else. The tools of the regime right now, as things stand, mainstream media and the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs that are used to create false realities that are then politically addressed. So if you watch Irish news and you have like a modern political story to do with pride or something, or transgender or human trafficking issues, invariably the mainstream media will be interviewing someone from an NGO pretending they're not from an NGO. This NGO invents this problem that doesn't exist. The media highlights it and everyone gets paid. So you sitting at home and you never thought that some issue in the world, like schoolboys being allowed to wear frilly knickers and skirts, was a big problem that had to be fixed. But suddenly in the 6 o'clock news, someone is saying that these teenage boys should be able to wear frilly knickers and skirts. And it's disgraceful and it's got to be addressed. And then suddenly it's policy. So it's a false reality to create false policy. And it's the mainstream media and the NGOs working together. It's so blatant at this point, it's almost ridiculous. But there's a lot of people have their snouts in their troughs. Ballymun, where I come from, that town is absolutely saturated in NGOs. Everyone's getting a paycheck, everyone's getting expenses, everyone's getting paid. You're not going to rock the boat on something that's actually making you a few quid, you know, or getting a salary, you know, and for doing very little. That's how they keep it going. What you watch on the 6 o'clock evening news is not reality. It's something that's been invented. Problems that never existed in that part of your life that you're suddenly worried about now. Every single thing they're involved in is an affront to natural law. And the universe functions exclusively on natural law and has a perfect accounting system that everything is brought back into balance and every account is settled at the end of closing. What they're doing will be addressed by natural law. The pendulum will always swing back. Now, people like us will have it better because we're already aware that this thing is so profane and in violation of natural law that it has no other choice than break. So we're already there. We're already on the other side. But it'll be an enormous shock to the average person. There is a thing called morphic resonance. It's basically that every aspect of the universe and cosmos is aware of the functioning of the rest. If there's a problem in one area, it will address it in another. Plato even suggested this from the Republic. He said, if you have overpopulation on Greek islands, what's going to happen is that they're not going to be able to produce enough food to feed the island and they'll die off through starvation. That's a natural law. These people have always wanted socialist Marxist control. The socialism was never about social equality. There was nothing more socialist in this earth than how the COVID vaccine was rolled out. That was straight out of Marx and Engels. The governments bought the vaccines from these corporations with the desire to distribute them as exclusive products. This is how it works within Marxist philosophy. And this is why the big corporations love it. We're the only game in town, or maybe 2 or 3 companies. You know, I mean, business flourished behind the Iron Curtain. It was just that not anyone could start a business. You know, that kind of thing. They would say a need and they say, well, what don't we have? Well, we don't have a company that makes garage doors. Okay, you're now a garage door company and it's the only one to supply. One of the reasons they won World War II is because they had tank factories that had 40,000 people working in them. And they were appalling conditions. Even the Third Reich was shocked by the level of how badly workers were treated in Soviet factories. But they got the job done. And they had no choice. Get on the train, comrade, or you get shot. All we're seeing in the West now is what socialism is, what Marxism theory is. hard political and economic theory with no regard for the psychic or spiritual or emotional lives of the populace. They're purely units within the concept of production and distribution. And me personally, I don't have a problem with people who want to change their gender once they're adults and they're doing it for the right reason and they're properly counselled. They're not, having themselves castrated and put on hormone blockers because they suffer from depression or something like that because some, psychotherapist has told them this. But I think an adult should be allowed to do anything they want. If a man wants to wear a woman's frock, become a woman, or a woman wants to become that, I have no problem with that. But that's personal choice. As an anarchist, I believe that personal choice should be absolutely sacrosanct. And you're right to be who you want to be. I'm not bothered by men wearing dresses. What I'm bothered by is appropriateness. You can't have a terrifying looking drag queen going into a kindergarten looking like a ghoul with their tackle hanging out. That's inappropriate. Okay, that's wrong. That's not good for the development of children because it affects their identity in terms of sexuality and their own personal identity. It also creates a schism between them and the nuclear family, the traditional parent. Once it leaves the domain of consenting adults, it's inappropriate. When it's inappropriate and enforced by the state, it's wrong, it's wrong. I think a lot of them are mentally ill. Certainly many of them are suffering from autism, and I'm not putting down autistic people. A lot of them seem to have behavioral issues or personality crisis, and they should not be put as role models. These are people who are not providing enough in themselves to actually influence children and society as a whole. It's horrific enough that a parent boasts about having their child injected with experimental corporate drug, the COVID vaccine. It's appalling that they think they should be given accolades for calling their child non-binary on social media, a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old. It's repugnant that they bring them to these drag queen story times and think they're doing their child a favor and boasting about it. We are that close to the legalization of sex with minors. That's how it's nearly there. Among certain middle class types, it's still too soon. When you have an earthquake, we've had all the tremors, right? Parents injecting their children with experimental vaccine. Drag queen story time, bringing them to pride parades to see fellas with their tackle hanging out. Closer, closer, closer. And the earthquake is the big one. Pedophilia seems to be the fuel which runs the globalists. I don't know why. Maybe it's the same thing that goes back to some kind of inbreeding, or they have so much money that it's the ultimate perversion for them. I don't know what it is, but they want that badly. And if you say, I cannot believe that minister passed into law legislation that would allow the age of consent to be reduced to 9 years old, you hit with a hate speech charge. That's the monsters you're up against. That's what they're like. The ultimate agenda is transhumanism, to replace humans with machines. This has been going on since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This is why the Luddites existed and why we probably should have listened to them. The belief is that human beings are expensive, we take too much work, and we just must be replaced by robots. And they now have the technology to do it. How do they do this? Well, they would destroy our sense of self. That's the war on culture. You have no culture, you have nothing to fight for. But it goes deeper. They destroy genders. If you know gender, you don't even know what you are. So if you look at work of groups like the Tavistocks and particularly the Fabians, the London School of Economics, the trajectory has been way out there since the 70s that they want an androgynous, cultureless society where there are no issues concerning schisms, where everyone is basically this amorphous blob of sexless nothing. Reproduction will be purely a technical process handled by academia and the state. It won't be childbirth or reproduction as we've known it for millions of years. They want the population massively reduced so they can replace us with robots. This is why they made superstars of people like Richard Dawkins and Brian Cox. There is nothing to you beyond the flesh robot. There is no connection to your higher self. This goes back to the Fabians. and in particular H.G. Wells. And this was quite a common thing back when these foundations were found. The Punt family believed that only people that had college degrees should be allowed to have children. And that went later on, they should be exterminated. I mean, the Third Reich got most of its beliefs, like the super race and all this, from H.G. Wells and his concept of the base, that everyone would wear the same uniform, men and women would have the same short haircut, and they would be killed if they didn't agree. You had George Bernard Shaw, another Fabian. He was a guy who fraternized with the British royal family, then went out and says that working class people should be exterminated because they're not pulling their worth. And he wanted committees where people would stand in front of the committees and say, prove that you're worthy to live or we'll kill you. And this is on camera. He asked for scientists to develop a humane gas.
It must be evident to all of you, you must all know half a dozen people at least, who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. And I think it would be a good thing to make everybody come before a properly appointed board, just as he might come before the income tax commissioners, and say every 5 years or every 7 years, just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social boat, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us and it can't be of very much use to yourself.
And when World War II happened and the Holocaust happened and the Bolshevik purges later on and before, he's on record, and the Fabians are on record of saying, well, you killed the wrong people. You're supposed to kill the uneducated, the poor, not kill the middle class based on religion. These are very disturbed and twisted people that have run the agenda ever since, particularly through places like the London School of Economics and the New School in New York via the Frankfurt Society. Now, these are all academics who believe that human beings are dysfunctional, they're problematic, one of their favorite words, and we have to be replaced with machines. If they get their machines working, they'll have their globalist paradise. Their globalist utopia is very few human beings, these elite castes being the only ones alive, everyone else exterminated and replaced with robots. There's a dark cynicism and there's a positive cynicism. The dark cynicism is being terribly negative about what's going on, totally understandable, and being angry and agitated by it all the time. The other way is to take a look at it and say to yourself, well, there's nothing I personally can do at the greater level to change things, but there's little things now here and there I can do, using cash all the time. Boycotting places that don't take cash. If you go to a supermarket and you have the supermarket till and the automatic checkouts, spend the extra few minutes at the regular till. And I don't ever ask you, just say, cash is dead useful, and then you give an example. Why? When my grandkid's birthday, I love the look on their face when they open it and find a €50 note inside. That's how we win. By being just ourselves, by being human. Within wickedness, and all the philosophers from Nietzsche to Kant to Swedenborg all said this, within all wickedness, and wickedness is violation of natural law, contains the seeds of its own destruction. Allow them to destroy themselves.